All right, let's start, guys. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us back here on campus at Harvard University, where we all share this connection. My name is Leah Abaya Keen, and I am the outgoing president of the Harvard Alumni for Global Women's Empowerment, which is a shared interest group or a SIG of the Harvard Alumni Association. And we are committed to the empowerment of women globally using education, connection, and dialogue. We strive to carry out our mission in a way that's politically neutral, that is, doesn't advocate, because we want to be a welcoming place for everybody, no matter what your political or ideological position is. We want you to be comfortable here, and we want you to be part of the community. Today's event is actually the culminating event of our year-long celebration of our 10th anniversary. I'm going to show you the next one, our 10-year anniversary. We realized last year it's been 10 years, so we've been doing a whole year of events. I'm just going to recap a little bit for you what we've been doing. If you don't mind, I'm going to toot our horn a little bit. I think these three tabs explain partially why it is that we've survived so long and flourished, not just survived, we've flourished. Our mission, we're dedicated to it, we're passionate about it. We love to bring in people who care about it. We love to shine the light on people who care about it. And we always use education, dialogue, connection. We want to create a community. Harvard Alumni Association thought we were doing such a great job after 7 years. We won our prize, won recognition in 2020. And we are a volunteer-led organization. We are blessed and lucky enough to have talented, committed, and really nice people to work with, both on my board and on the team members. And we hope after you see our events and see what we do, check us out, that you'll be happy to join us too and be part of the same family. And so here is our series, our collection of just anniversary events. The first one, the retrospective panel, was where we talked to our past presidents and crucial board members from the early beginnings of Harvard Globally who helped shape us. So that was a fun panel to do. And then this morning, we just finished up an on-campus in-person 10K. Some of us walked, some of us ran, some of us stayed here and ate cookies. You know, we all did what we could. All right. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the other events that you're seeing up there. We started movie clubs during the pandemic as a way to bring our community together. But for our anniversary, we did a movie club plus. Our members paid this time for a special screening of the movie and a chance to have a Q&A and an interview with the director of the movie Below the Belt, which was about endometriosis. And the discussion, there are a few people who were there who are here now. It was very moving. It was very emotional, not just the personal stories that were shared, but also this anger, right? That women's health is just not receiving the attention that it deserves, right? And that these poor women had to suffer for so long for being recognized. So that was our movie club plus. This was the panel. We do lots of panels. This was a celebration panel, and we were so exhilarated to hear from leaders, women leaders from Europe, from India, from the US, to share their journeys with us and give us inspiration and also kind of a mandate that, yeah, we're up here. A lot of other women are up here, but we need more so that there's still work to be done. So they, you know, we were celebrating them, but we were also inspired by them. Don't forget, we need more. What we did for our 10th anniversary summit here on campus was we combined two of our biggest annual events, which is the Roundtable, the Student Alumni Roundtable, and the Global Women's Empowerment Expo. So this is the Roundtable above me, and the two pictures there are the two panels we had during the expo. We held them here on campus. This is the kind of a job fair. We feature different organizations who share their mission with alumni and students who attend. And hopefully then we get volunteers, we get eyeballs on their work, we get donations. So these are all nonprofit organizations that we feature. We had two different panels that day. We have different themes for our in-person and also virtual expos, because the virtual sessions followed the in-person roundtable that we had here on campus. And that allows us to pull in organizations from all over the world or even other parts of the USA who can't come to Cambridge. And this is my favorite picture. All right. We have education, we have dialogue and all of the events we've talked about, but you can't get this kind of connection over Zoom. So this was, again, the speakers really struck chords with our audience. So we were very happy that we were able to do this, but we will never combine these two major events again because it was a lot of work. And then, okay, we had our regular programming. Those were just our anniversary programs. So we had two fireside chats. We had a Global Be Social. Hidden Figures was our movie, from a few years ago, but some of us rewatched it. Some of us hadn't watched it yet. And then we had our second annual general members meeting. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about our discussion circles, which are regular programming. And it's a way for us to provide a safe space for our members to discuss issues that are topical, that are current. But because of the situation in the world this past year, we did something special. We found for the first discussion circle, we had academics and researchers who really explained, gave backgrounds, gave history, and allowed us to understand this situation better. And then for the second one, we had people who were working on the ground with women and children in areas of conflict all around the world. And both of these we received great feedback on. So, regular programming, but with a lot of impact. And then, of course, our flagship program is our essay contest. There are books on the table. Those are what we usually give to people who, as a thank you gift for people who donate $99 or more. But this is a platform for the youth of our world to let us know, fix these issues facing women and girls so that our world is going to be better. And we hope that by giving them this platform, that they stay engaged with these issues, that they care, they continue to fight for them, because this is going to be their world. If they want global women's empowerment, they're going to have to contribute to it, right? So that's what we're hoping. And even though we have fantastic volunteers, we do need funds to operate. So it just so happened, I happened to see a newsletter from our bank that their mission aligned with ours. This is a program they have because they calculated it would take 257 years at the rate we're going for women to reach financial parity with men. I explained who we were. They have sponsored us for a couple of years. They've worked with us. They've collaborated with us on different programs on financial equity for women. They've provided speakers. So we're very grateful to them. And that's our 10-year anniversary at the end. I'm here now at the finishing up at 11 years. So these are QR codes. I'll have them up later. They take you straight to our website or straight to our membership page. If you are not Harvard affiliated, you can still join as a friend. I think most of you had Harvard affiliation, so we're good. And now back to today's event. Okay, we're gonna be hearing about the impact that the return of the Taliban to Afghanistan has had on women's existence, right? So many facets of their existence. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from our guest, Lauren Oates, who's here she's the executive director of the Right to Learn Afghanistan. And what I'm going to do now is have Julie Palmer come up. She is the current director of our essay contest and also the founding president of Harvard Global League. So we would not be here without her. So.
Thank you all for being here. A big welcome. We're so happy that you're engaged with us and hope you will stay engaged. It's my great honor to introduce Lauren Oates today. Lauren has been a relentless advocate for women's education in Afghanistan and elsewhere as well. And she has worked in Afghanistan and elsewhere where girls' education is challenged from 2003 to 2016 in the field. So she was on the ground, back and forth, doing her best to support women and girls. We're really lucky to have her here today. She was a consultant in that work for UNICEF, for other NGOs, for governments. And in 2018, she became the executive director of, I think it was then called Women for Women Afghanistan. It's recently changed its name to Right to Learn Afghanistan. Just last month, Lauren won the prestigious Queen Soraya Initiative Award at the National Press Club from the primary Afghanistan newspaper for her work supporting women and girls in Afghanistan. So she's valued by Afghan women around the world, especially in the diaspora. And we are honored to have her here today. I think we'll start by letting Lauren walk us through the current state of affairs in Afghanistan and the brave efforts of her group and other groups to maintain educational opportunities for women and girls in the face of adversity. Then she'll give a short keynote. Then I will do a kind of fireside chat. I've got some questions already prepared. And then we'll open it up to Q&A, and our past president, Sajid Ashraf, will manage the Q&A. So you guys, as you're listening, please think about what you'd like to know from Lauren. And thank you. And Lauren, why don't you take it away? Thanks.
Well, hi, everyone. It's really great to be here today. It's actually been, I was calculating this morning, 2 decades since I've been in Boston. So this was a great excuse to be back and to be among fellow travelers interested in the situation of women and girls in the world, and a few Canadians as well, as it turns out. Yeah. Yeah, I've had a great introduction to. It feels like much longer that we've known about each other, but we did the 10K walk this morning. So if you see me kind of like holding the 10K, I put in my steps for the day. But yeah, just looking forward to telling you a little bit about what was happening in the country. So that's where I'll start, and we'll talk more about this in the Q&A. But I just want to sort of touch some high level points to help us interpret what's actually going on right now in the country. So I'll start with what we pay the most attention to, which is the restrictions on education for girls and women. Afghanistan has this dubious distinction of being the only country in the world that bans secondary schooling for girls. And this is, both an astounding violation of human rights and a total outlier against global trends. But it's also just a very efficient way to plunge a country into poverty, because you have all these knock-on effects that come from lack of access to education, because education is tied to virtually every other development goal there is, whether that's economic, health, and other areas of human development. So I can tell you more about these restrictions in the Q&A, but I just put this timeline here so you can see how quickly they banned secondary schooling after they took power, which was August 2021. So within a month, they shut down high schools for girls. So this was a high priority for them. And similarly, they did the same thing back in the 1990s when they captured Kabul in 1996. Within days, they were issuing these restrictions on girls' education. So it's really a key priority. Another thing I want to mention to do with education is what's actually happening in the education that is taking place in the country. And this is a sort of aspect that doesn't get discussed as much. So girls are barred from classrooms after grade 6, but we should be worried about the classrooms that are open and the consequences for Afghanistan and really for the world at large of a Taliban-controlled public education system. Because many have argued that this could very quickly become a machine to promote the Taliban's fundamentalist worldview and their violent ideology. And there's already really alarming evidence to this effect. They've converted hundreds of public schools into madrasas, and there's plans to open more. And they do allow girls to attend madrasas. They've been revising the curricula and textbooks and really just mobilizing the public education system as a vehicle to propagate their ideology, including their misogynist views. So, for example, there's promotion of child marriage now in the curriculum, their views against pluralism, their views against science, discriminatory ideas towards non-Sunni Afghans, and their explicit calls for violence against various groups. So the radicalization of the school system is already underway. It's happening now, but it's just received very little attention from the outside world, even though I think that, this is both a human rights issue in terms of the right to education is not just about access to education. It's also about what you learn, the content of education, but it's arguably also a hard security issue. So if you're not a bleeding heart liberal like me who doesn't care at all about human rights, we should still be concerned just from the security standpoint. So concurrent to this, is the humanitarian crisis in the country. It's of epic proportions. Food inflation started really promptly in August 2021, and it's just been rising ever since. And households that depended on women breadwinners can no longer do so, and many of those families have become destitute. So large portions of the skilled workforce have also left the country. And a UN report found that Afghanistan's economy lost almost $5 billion US within just 12 months when they started introducing the restrictions on women's work. And that contraction in the licit economy, has on the flip side, it supports the illicit economy. So there's now around 18% of the country's GDP is based on things like poppy cultivation and heroin production in the country. So all of this means that food insecurity is acute. There's families who were recently in the middle class who were doing well, and they're now surviving on tea and bread. Malnutrition cases have been skyrocketing. And even when children can access feeding centers, which most of them can't, but even if they can access those and they survive, malnutrition leaves really devastating effects for life, like developmental delays. So that situation, the economic crisis, has also triggered a really sharp increase in child labor. And one of the most heartbreaking consequences of the rise in poverty is the very well-documented increase in child marriages. So then you have this human rights crisis underway as well. There's at least 100 different specific formal restrictive measures that have been announced against women and girls specifically, apart from all the other restrictive measures. And from these, what we can see is it's very clear that the goal is to simply replicate the situation of the 1990s, to bring back all the rules that were in place when the Taliban ruled back then. So the most recent thing, just a couple of weeks ago, the Taliban announced a ban on images of living things, which was also something that was in effect in the 1990s. And that's already starting to be enforced in some provinces. So that affects, television, books, social media, all kinds of things that people use day to day, this restriction. And the outcome of these restrictions, it's not just that you have to be a bit uncomfortable by restrictions on how you dress or how you move about in life. The consequences are truly deadly, because what's happened is there's been a stark rise in femicide. And we know that that's the tip of the iceberg because most cases are not documented. But several groups, like one called Afghan Witness and another called Zan Media, have been carefully documenting as much as they can from the evidence available to them situations where women have been murdered directly by Taliban officials, but also situations where they're being murdered in their communities, in their homes, because the general situation is creating this enabling environment for that, this environment of impunity, that there won't be any consequences. There's also been systemic sexual violence taking place, and the Afghan newspaper mentioned earlier, Hashte Sob or 8 a.m. has been doing really important investigative work trying to get those stories out. And you can read their articles in English as well online about the way the Taliban use sexual violence as a weapon against women protesters, women activists, women journalists that end up in detention. So I've outlined 3 different crises, and we could also add to this a displacement crisis. But these are actually really all one and the same. They all have the same root cause, which is the Taliban's policies. Although you will sometimes hear people say, let's just leave the human rights stuff out of it for a moment and focus on the humanitarian needs of people. And I think that doesn't really make any sense, because the humanitarian crisis is caused by the human rights crisis. These are part and parcel, one and the same. And we can only understand and interpret them that way. And ultimately, they'll only be solved that way. So the solution to the humanitarian situation, to the displacement situation, to the education situation is going to be a human rights solution. And part of what Afghan women have been arguing is important to recognize this, is to call it what it is. And they've been calling it gender apartheid. And I think, this is not a new term. It's a term that Afghan women activists used during the previous period of Taliban rule. But it's a very apt term, both because it's useful legally, and we'll get into that, I hope, during the Q&A from an international legal perspective, but it's just more descriptive of this entire system of discrimination. It's not, one discriminatory policy or a bad rule here or there. It's an entire system that has at its heart, it's designed to erase women from public life, erase women from any spaces outside of their home. And this view of women being second-class citizens at best is really central to the Taliban's whole ideology. And I think sometimes, over here, we miss that. We think it's peripheral, that it's just something they're doing, on the way to achieving their grander vision. But this is their vision. This is absolutely central to their ideology. So I've learned over time that you can't just give people tons of bad news and motivate them that way. So I'm going to tell you about what we're doing, the spaces we found to work and to make a difference in this very challenging situation. And I'd say, as a kind of overarching philosophical approach, we looked at this idea of, that a crisis is two-part. That it's a challenge, it's a severe situation where things are on the edge, but it's also a chance to reset things, openings. There may be new opportunities, and actually many of the words in different languages for crisis reflect this dual meaning. So we wanted to, acknowledge the severity of what was going on, the gravity, but at the same time ask, what can we do? How do we have to do it? How can we get innovative and find openings and do what we can in this situation? So we're about 27 years old, and for most of our existence, apart from the beginning when the Taliban were in power and the current situation, we were able to, work on the ground and support girls and women's education. And it looks somewhat like this. This is seen from a classroom at a girls' school in Kabul that we supported for many years. And we can't do education this way anymore, but we can still do it. And it will just look more like this, the use of technology. And this is something that we were engaged in going way back. We started with this is our little tree. We call this Darakta Danesh, which means knowledge tree in Dari. And around 2011, 2012, we started working on this idea of the Darakta Danesh library, which would be a digital space where people could access learning materials in their own language. And we started building it. We launched it in 2014. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a moment. And then in 2022, we started building something called DD courses, or Darakta Danesh courses, which all of you would know Coursera or EDX. This is like a very tiny Afghan EDX. And so we don't have thousands of courses, we have dozens, but all of our courses are in Afghan languages as well as English, and they're free and open for people to take online, and thousands do take them. And then DD Classroom. So I'll tell you about each of these initiatives in a moment, but the change was that back then, technology was complementary to traditional in-person education. The difference now is that it is education. It's our only vehicle. So we had to stop, for example, in-person literacy classes for adult women. That became impossible to do, but we were still able to do things with technology. So that was an opening for us that we took. So DD Classroom, this is the youngest branch of our tree. We conceptualized this after the ban on secondary schooling. It was my colleague, Murari, our senior director, who said late in 2021, we have to open an online school. We have to find a way for girls to get back to class through technology. So we conceived this high school, which was initially a pilot project. We wanted to see how it goes. And we enrolled the first 25 girls in the first grade 7 class in the summer of 2022. And today we have 556 students now studying in grades 7 to 10. So we'll bring on grade 11 next year, and then grade 12 the following year. And our target is to have an enrollment of at least 1,000 by the end of 2025. So we're on track for that. And the wonderful thing about our school is that we use a dual curriculum. So we sort of merged the Afghan curriculum developed prior to the Taliban and the Ontario curriculum. And the Ontario curriculum, because we needed a jurisdiction to issue diplomas to our students. And of course, that can't be Afghanistan. They won't do it there. So we looked at all these jurisdictions, and the one we found where they don't require the student to come and physically sit their exam in person in that jurisdiction was Ontario. So we partnered up with a school there, and our students learn from Afghan teachers, and then they learn from Ontario certified teachers so that they can get that diploma when they graduate in grade 12. So DD Library, the oldest branch of the tree, today has over 8,000 resources in 9 languages. So the 2 official languages of Afghanistan, Dari and Pashto, plus English, plus 6 minority languages spoken in Afghanistan. And in some cases, we host the only digital materials that exist in some of these endangered languages that aren't codified. And we have millions of people who use this resource, and they span from, teachers who are teaching in underground schools, or people abroad, students, or just, people who want to learn about things. I always remember a woman farmer in Kandahar who wrote to us years ago saying, I looked in your library and you don't have any information about this grub that has been infesting my orchards. And I need you to translate something in that. So our librarians went off and she sent us pictures of the grub, and they identified it, and then they found materials and translated it. So really just, we have, wide variety of people using these resources regularly. DD Courses, our courseware platform, we've had close to 4,000 people enroll. And like any MOOCs, the completion rate takes longer in these self-paced courses, but we have just over 1,000 to date, 14 courses available, 5 more in development that should be published by the end of the year. And we have a partnership with Arizona State University where they allow us to refer women in Afghanistan to their online English courses. When we first talked to them about it, we said, is it okay if, say, like 30 women take your courses? And we set up an application form on Google Forms, distributed it, and we ultimately had 23,000 sign up. So we came back and said, is it okay if and 10,000 of those 23,000 have gone on to take the courses. They do a placement test and then they get placed in their course. So that's a wonderful partnership. So everyone asks us, okay, all this online stuff is fine and nice, but how can people afford internet and devices to connect? So our solution to that is a fund that we set up in 2022 to pay for devices, connectivity, power banks, satellites, whatever it is that someone needs to access virtual education. And this is sort of a sister fund to an older initiative of ours that has been around since 2012 called the Shafia Fund, which is a more traditional scholarship fund that funds all the kind of non-tech costs like tuition or transportation. We fund a lot of flights when women get opportunities to study abroad, and equipment or textbooks. So I'll give you some metrics for these 2 initiatives. So my dear colleagues have looked through close to 8,000 applications since this initiative was launched in 2022. And we've been able to assist close to 2,000 of the individuals who have applied. We procure the items directly. So we get the laptop or the net packages and we get them to the women. And the Shafia Fund, we've assisted 406 women with scholarships. And just this year to date, we've looked at close to 600 applications. So there's a lot of demand on these 2 initiatives. We receive applications virtually daily for them. So Learning Plus Baskets, I wanted to profile this initiative because it gives you an idea of how we've had to address the humanitarian crisis in the work we do. So, we don't think of ourselves as a humanitarian organization, and yet the people we work with who we're providing education for are facing food insecurity at home. And so something that we did in the past, which we started doing this during COVID, which was to distribute learning baskets. They're literally baskets filled with books and learning materials for all the members of the household, for different age groups. And since 2021, we've combined that with food aid, so that seemed crass to give people books when they were hungry. And yet that's our mandate, but we found a way to combine it, and we just changed the name to Learning Plus Baskets. So I wanted to talk a bit about how we work in a community of actors. There's a really interesting emerging ecosystem. Since 2021, many people have risen to the occasion and started online schools of different kinds at different levels to try to meet this gap, to try to basically step into the position of the state who's supposed to be providing education and is not doing so, and to play that role. And part of how we've contributed to leadership in this area is as a steering committee member of this new coalition, or it's 3 years old now, the Alliance for Education of Women in Afghanistan. And we work with a number of others on the steering committee: the American University of Afghanistan, Stanford University, the UNHCR, Arizona State University, and to date, we have over 70 member organizations in Afghanistan, internationally, who are all in one way or another delivering education programming. And the main thing that we've been focusing on recently is developing a set of standards to hold ourselves to account, because we're all independent. So there's no government actor above us saying, you have to have certified teachers, or you have to use good curriculum, or you have to ensure the security of your students. So we wrote our own standards and are committing to adhere to those standards and to promote them among all the members in the absence of any kind of regulatory framework for us. We do lots of advocacy work, and on our website, on our advocacy page, you'll find a toolkit, the Higher Education Toolkit, and it has actions that universities and colleges can take that help address the ban on higher education for women and girls. And we worked with university leaders to figure out, what actions are viable for these institutions to take. And these were the 6 that we came up with. And there's lots of guidance around, how to go about this. And we urge institutions to just grab one and start where you can, start doing something. Maybe you can't provide scholarships, but there should be one of these things that you can do. So that's a very accessible document that is a starting point for action. So obviously everybody in this room has connections to universities. So take that and share it among university leaders that you know. So we do lots of other stuff, and I won't go through all of it so that we can get into discussion. We prioritize hiring in Afghanistan to support women who've lost their jobs there. So that's our Afghan talent base, and we've been able to provide over 30 jobs through that initiative. We do a lot of work in critical and creative thinking education, because we think that's sort of cross-cutting to addressing a lot of the education content needs that are needed. We're still working with Afghan teachers who have been exiled and are living in Pakistan and Turkey through our digital learning centers, where those are spaces where, unlike the girls in Afghanistan who are all at home when they're studying, these girls can come to a more classroom-like setting and study there. So those are our DLCs. And we do resettlement. So we do refugee sponsorship in Canada. And I hear that there's a similar kind of private sponsorship system is coming to the US that's been underway in Canada. And hopefully that's a pathway for
Active, actually.
it's active. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So so that's an important pathway to help get people to safety. So I wanted to get to the end here by sharing actually a message from a 15-year-old girl in Afghanistan, from a letter she sent me. Her name is Tahara. And, I was really struck by her message, and just want to highlight in this second paragraph here how she says, "We want the world to hear us, see us, feel us. We don't want to be ignored. We want to be heard and seen. We are not dead in a corner. We are still alive with our hopes and dreams." And I had the opportunity yesterday to meet with Dr. Richard Bennett, who's the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Afghanistan, and with David Spruill, who's Canada's Special Envoy to Afghanistan, and other policymakers in Canada. And I brought this letter and dozens of others from Afghan girls so that they could hear what these girls' lives are like now that they've lost the right to education, and what their hopes and dreams are, and what messages they want to get across. And And I wanted to share the same with you because we have to heed that call. One thing I've learned over the years of doing this is you can't wait around thinking that there's more powerful people than you who are going to take it up, that the politicians will handle it, that they care about rights. In the end, there's just us. So we have to listen to girls like Tahara and do what we can. I also wanted to come back to this photo I showed you earlier, because for me, it was just one of those photos that stopped me in my tracks. This was the 4-year-old girl who works in a brick factory outside of Kabul. And she's just one of many tiny kids doing grueling, cruel work instead of going to school. And you know, we're always aware that there's bad things happening to other people elsewhere, but sometimes a picture can help bring it home that these are people just like us. You know, and for me, that did this because she's got that universal exhausted child look. You know, that any parent would recognize, the hand flopped over her chest and the full cheeks. And yet so many trapdoors await this 4-year-old girl: forced marriage, more child labor, poverty, maternal mortality, if we don't do something to change that pathway. And all the indignities that lie ahead for her. And I know this photo is hard to look at, and that's exactly why we need to look at it, to remind us of that universalism, that everywhere we are the same, and everywhere this is wrong. So we have to change it, and we can do something. And you know, I always do this thought experiment with myself of how will we be seen in history in 30 years and 100 years and 200 years from now? How will we be looked upon? And recently I've concluded that we'll be seen as essentially not having reached civilization yet. And I'm not a cynic by nature at all. I don't think you can do this work for any length of time if you are, but I truly believe that we're basically barbarians. That when we know these things are happening to 4-year-old girls, when we're aware of it and we shrug our shoulders, then we have a long way to go. But you're here, you care. I thank you for that. I'm very grateful to be connected to this community of fellow travelers and people who care about the status of women and girls everywhere. And I thank you for your concern and your outrage. We need outrage in this situation, and for your solidarity. So we'll continue the discussion and look forward to hearing your questions.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lauren, for doing this work and for sharing with us really compelling and inspiring view of why we need to be doing this work. It's really important, and we're so glad to be connected with you. And I want to set the context here. For Global We, our very first ever event was a screening of the Honor Diaries 10 years ago. And we were very blessed to have Raheel Ratha, one of the women featured in that film, speak to us about the film and about her work for women's rights around the world. And Raheel has introduced us to Lauren because Raheel admires Lauren and her work so much. So we've come full circle 10 years later, and here we are feeling so grateful for this introduction. I also want to say that Global We have been devoted to trying to help women, girls in Afghanistan since the beginning, even when the Taliban were not in power. We, as you saw earlier from Leah, we run an essay contest in schools all around the world, and we were lucky enough to have a volunteer who was a military intelligence officer who had served in Afghanistan and was so moved by what he saw there, even when the Taliban were not in power, just what was happening to girls, that he volunteered to run this ethnic contest at the School of Leadership of Afghanistan, which some of you may have read the pre-read materials we sent out about Shabana and Sola and this wonderful school that she founded. And so we ran an essay contest there, and we had an essay contest winner who used her credential as a winner to get out of Afghanistan, attend school in Canada. And when the Taliban took power, she was able, in the midst of the chaos that was happening, to get her family out as well. And she wrote us a letter saying that Global We and her credential from Global We had been instrumental in getting herself and her family out from under this regime. And so we feel grateful and happy that we have that small, nothing like what you have done. But they say when you save one person, you save a world. So yeah, so those are our connections. And Jessica, who spoke up a little bit earlier, has been working with the Afghan refugee community here and has worked with us as well. We also have recently run an ethic contest in Afghanistan with one of these remote schools, and we hope to expand and work with Lauren and her organization and do an even bigger contest. And this is with the goal of raising the voices of girls in Afghanistan who have so much to say and so much hope to send out into the world. And we want to be helpful in raising their voices. So that's our context. But I had some questions prepared, and you have answered some of them already beautifully. So I'm just going to jump right to one that has been on the mind of some of our volunteers. And that is a very practical, logistical one. Some people have asked, how does Right to Learn Afghanistan get equipment and data to the girls in Afghanistan safely? How do the girls who can't speak outside of their home get this equipment? So first question.
Yeah, so we procure it locally. We've done that for a long time. We've never been in the business of importing items into the country. And unfortunately, the market is such that you can get virtually anything in Afghanistan. So we procure all the hardware locally, and we work with vendors, and same for net packages, which are anonymized, so they're not traceable to the person who's using them. And then the girls basically tether their phones and join their classes online. And our high school at this time is asynchronous, synchronous. So they attend on a schedule. So they have to be online at a certain time of day. They're online for about 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. So it uses quite a bit of data. So we provide that for all of our students, and then we provide it for others through this remote communication assistance. And what's been really incredible to us, because we see through those applications where women are finding opportunities. So one of the rules is that they have to be enrolled in a program to be eligible to get a computer or an internet. And they are in every conceivable kind of program. They're studying graphic design, they're studying midwifery, they're studying English, business, computers. All kinds of things. Many of them attend University of the People because they waived all tuition for Afghan women. Many of them are sort of trying to get their English good enough to apply to a university. But we get a good picture of their hopes and dreams through those applications. And they're really tenacious. So they're resourceful, and they're finding workarounds to the current restrictions. And one of the letters that I gave to this guy yesterday, it was really interesting. This girl was saying, I thank the Taliban because I am more determined to get an education now than I ever would have been if it weren't for them. So I'm grateful that they've given me this drive, determination.
To just as a practical matter, if they can't speak outside of their home, do they need the assistance of male family members to get the equipment and the data?
Yeah, so the biggest challenges our students face are those general restrictions that apply to all women and girls. So not issues specific to them being a student at our school. And I should say we are by no means the only online school. We're in a good company. There's many of them. So this is an increasingly common thing in private homes. But yeah, as soon as you step outside your home, you're taking on a certain number of risks, and something like going to the grocery store, is, you have to think, is it worth maybe getting whipped in the street, maybe getting detained, maybe being accosted in some way? And so those who can will typically send the men or go, bring a man with them. But not everyone can. And one of the things that concerns us is we know, the girls in our school are the ones who have the support of their families, and we are not reaching girls who are in other circumstances or who are in more rural areas where the net infrastructure is not good. And we're pleased that every year we've been able to increase enrollment, and we're fundraising as hard as we can to do that. But we're also ever conscious of all the girls that we're not reaching. And in our last intake, we had 37 spots available, and we received close to 1,100 applications with no public marketing whatsoever. And afterwards, one of the girls wrote to my colleague, and she had circled our logo, Right to Learn, and she wrote, "Not for me." And like, it just broke our hearts to see this, because what could we say? And she's right, it's not fair. She was perfectly qualified to go to the school. We couldn't take her. And there's many online schools, but few are actually accredited. And the ones that are, they're full largely. So there's, the demand far exceeds the supply.
You mentioned briefly, and I'd love to have more explanation, that Right to Learn Afghanistan has been working to codify gender apartheid under international law. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's working?
Yeah, I think this is super important work. It's collective work. You play a arguably small role in a big community of diaspora organizations, legal scholars, experts who are pushing for this. And there's been some key openings, some key opportunities that have come up recently. So there's a few ways this can be done, but just as background, gender apartheid, this concept, is not currently a crime under international law. So that's the goal, is to criminalize it. There is a crime called gender persecution. And there's been a push for the International Criminal Court, which is actually already investigating the Taliban, to add gender persecution to that investigation. So that's one thing we're pushing for. So that's a crime already on the books that can be pursued. But in addition, we want gender apartheid to become a crime against humanity specifically. And the opportunity here is that there's a new draft Crimes Against Humanity Convention. It's actually being discussed at this very moment in the UN General Assembly into November. And there's a proposal to add gender apartheid as a crime against humanity. It's simply one sentence that would be added to the draft. That's it. Sounds so easy. But this will probably take another few years for this convention to actually really come to life. A lot of consensus has to be built around it. And then for there to be, actual adjudication is slow. But it's important not only for its symbolic value for Afghanistan, it's important for the pressure it puts on the Taliban, because they do want to be part of the international community. They want to be seen as the legitimate rulers of Afghanistan. They badly want to be seen that way. So stuff like this, they don't like, even if it doesn't really have any meaningful impact for them right now. But the really critical thing is that, this is a deterrence for other would-be committers of gender apartheid, whether those are states or non-state actors. And it's a big gap right now in international law that this is not a crime. So this needs to happen. And then the third sort of mechanism is something that actually its wheels started to turn a few weeks ago. And that is to take Afghanistan to the International Court of Justice for its treatment of women through the CEDAW, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women adjudication process, which has never been done before. So even though CEDAW has this provision that says, if a state that violates these articles that are intended to protect women's rights, another state can take that state to court. But that process has never been triggered until a few weeks ago. Canada and Australia, the Netherlands and Germany together gave the Taliban notice that they're going to pursue this process, and they're obliged to sort of give the Taliban a chance to negotiate and waited out 6 months. So all of these processes are terribly, terribly slow. But still necessary. So there's more, but those are kind of the three most key mechanisms that I think are the lowest hanging fruit at this time for gender apartheid.
So I want to ask one more question before we open it up to our audience. You have spoken about the importance, and this is important for all of us, I think, the importance and value of solidarity from women around the world and the need for an inclusive, internationalizing feminism. And especially in the context where outsiders are sometimes reluctant to speak out for the rights of women in other cultures, Muslim communities, for example, and the harms of cultural relativism. So can you expound on that? That seems like a really important thing for all of us who are here in the West to hear.
Yeah, it's very, very important. And I guess I'll share my earliest experience kind of confronting this thinking. So I started doing this work when I was a middle schooler in 1996 when the Taliban took power the first time. And I had this petition I was going around asking people to sign. And a teacher at my high school said, I'm not going to sign that. And he said, that's just their culture. And it's up to them how to treat their women. And fortunately, my ingrained, child voice could call a spade and say, what, like, that doesn't make any sense. That's not right. And now I know the label for that cultural relativism idea. And I've been confronting it ever since. I mean, it's very, very prevalent. And the worst thing about it is not only that it's simply not grounded in truth, but that often the people who are saying such things believe them to be progressive things that they're saying. So it comes from a place of wanting to be respectful of difference and tolerant of everyone. But I think what often happens is we ask the wrong people what culture is. We take the Taliban's word for what Afghan culture is instead of asking, the women, the girls who endure child marriages, the women's rights activists. And Raheel often has said, where are our liberal allies? Why are so-called feminists in the West so reluctant to speak out for their fellow sisters in particularly the Muslim parts of the world? So there's sort of a disappointment in the way feminism is being pursued here, and I've seen headlines like feminism fails women in Afghanistan, and I think that's deserved. So parallel to the changes that have to happen in Afghanistan for rights to be better protected, we have work to do in our culture here to confront that, and to let people know that actually it's the opposite of progressive. It's in a way, it's infantilizing to Afghans. It's saying, well, we don't really think that you're ready for big ideas like human rights. And that's just the opposite of what you'll actually hear from people in Afghanistan. And I learned what it means to be a feminist, what it means to be a Democrat in Afghanistan from Afghans who are fighting and sometimes dying for those ideologies that we think are ours. We think they belong to us. And actually, we here are doing a disservice to those important ideas, and others are trying to hold that torch. I think we've got to pay attention to who we're listening to about what Afghan culture is, and many Muslim women's organizations are doing really fabulous work in this area. I'm happy to share more information about that for anyone that's interested. But it has to start with just the listening and the questioning. When you hear a statement like, a couple of days ago, a child marriage case came across my desk, and someone in Canada said, all cultures are different. I said, well, I don't know how, like this 13-year-old girl who's being raped every night, that's what child marriage is. That's what child marriage is. Like, if she would agree with that. So we really have to challenge this. We've got to find the language to do it, because I think often we're very scared to engage. We're living in a time of a politics of division, and it's so much easier to focus on our differences with people than our similarities. And we have to move away from that and to look at how we're the same as people, that we all want the fundamentally same things. And this idea of universal rights, it's real. It's not idealism. It's a real thing that that has legs.
So I think I will turn. Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you for your work. Thank you for sharing your work with us. Thank you for inspiring us. And I will turn it over to Sajida. Maybe you want to take a seat there. And she's gonna. I'll stay there.
Thanks, everybody. And Lauren, thank you again. It's been really, really inspirational to hear from you. And I am Canadian, so and I'm also, you can see, alum.
Oh, nice.
There. And, you know, I'm reflecting back to when Afghans first came to Canada, you know, which was in the 80s. And many came, they did not speak English. They were forced to flee. And in Canada, we have a policy of welcoming immigrants. I remember I was one of the first wave of people who was teaching English to Afghan immigrants in Canada when they first came, to help them settle. But the tragedy was that we had to help them settle. They had to leave their home and come to be with us. So we have a number of questions from our audience at home on Zoom, and we also hopefully will have some questions from the audience here. But let me start with the first question. So yesterday, the New York Times reported that many countries have decided to resume diplomatic communications with the Taliban, ignoring the rights of use, particularly the rights of use of women. And, you know, how can we move forward then to change the regime's violation of their rights when they're now being endorsed by other governments?
Yeah, so whoever asked that, thank you. This is really critical. Yeah, I think they called it a normalization of relations with the Taliban. And we've been watching this happen, this slow creep, for years, really. So it was like the usual suspects at first, you know, China, Pakistan, Russia, but then other states, the UAE, Qatar, some of the Central Asian states north of Afghanistan, you know, started doing a couple of things, welcoming Taliban diplomats. And that's a complicated situation. So Afghanistan's still just the bare majority of its embassies worldwide are actually under control of the republic. And that started to shift. So one by one, those embassies are being retaken by the Taliban. The Taliban are not recognizing, you know, passports issued by those embassies. So that's a concern, and that can only happen with the agreement of the host countries. It started to happen in Europe. The Afghan embassy in London recently closed down. They said they were asked to leave. And we see a lot of Taliban travel. So supposedly there's supposed to be travel bans in effect, but they managed to get exemptions. They travel for leisure. They go to medical visits to Turkey. They go on Hajj. And meanwhile, you know, Afghan women can't go outside their homes without being, you know, accompanied by someone, and they can't easily leave the country. And these guys are flouting these sanctions pretty openly. And it's true that, you know, trying to directly influence the Taliban is more or less a lost cause, but we can influence these countries that are engaging with them, right? Like the US, Canada, they have diplomatic relationships with the United Arab Emirates, with Qatar, with Kazakhstan. And we should be calling them to account and say, you know, why are you doing this? And so that's a really underutilized tool. So that's part of the answer of what can be done. But yeah, this is something to keep an eye on because it's exactly that. It's normalization. So it'll just get to a point where enough states have engaged with them that they'll get that formal recognition that they really crave.
They're not changing the message that they're getting, which is very unfortunate.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from anybody here? Yes.
First, I just want to say thank you so much for being here today and sharing this very inspiring work. My name is Anna, I'm the Vice Chair of Brandon. My question is, under your leadership with Rights to Learn, what is your biggest challenge and what is the biggest obstacles? And how can global allies work together to advocate for educational rights from around the world?
So that people in the audience can hear.
Yeah, what's the biggest challenge? And how can people around the world advocate? It's hard to pick just one. It changes all the time, like every day is different. I mean, this is a great job for someone who doesn't want to be bored ever. I'm not saying it's easy, but yeah, it's like I'll open my inbox and be like, oh, that's a new one. I mean, just the constantly evolving operational context is really challenging, the restrictions. Keeping up with those, keeping our students and teachers safe and yeah, worrying about them would be the main thing. And our colleagues, of course. And then we spend a fair amount of time worrying about infrastructure, like what happens if the internet goes down. To date, that's mostly been practical things like power outages rather than interference with like censorship of the internet, but that's not to say that won't come later. So one of the things we want people to advocate for is satellite internet. There are satellites over Afghanistan, they're just not turned on. And that would provide one means of internet access that sort of bypasses the situation on the ground. So it's important to have these kind of backup plans in place so that this online learning can continue. We also advocate those actions in the higher education toolkit are some of the things that can be done by universities and colleges. All these international justice mechanisms are important. And basically, giving a lifeline to Afghans, I always try to challenge this idea that, displaced people, refugees, and I say displaced people because the majority of people who fled Afghanistan are not convention refugees, but I think de facto should be considered, any person leaving Afghanistan has a good reason to do so. They're often seen as burdens, and actually they're assets, because I remember the first time I came to Kabul in 2003, I sat on a plane full of Afghans coming back to their country after living in Australia, the UAE, Europe, Canada, the US, with their money, with their education, with their training, ready to invest in the country with their skills. And that will happen again if we make sure that displaced people can access education. So supporting scholarships and educational programming in all the places hosting Afghan refugees, and even giving them the chance to get there through education. So the German government supported 5,000 women to get scholarships to study in Bangladesh, for instance. So that's one model that could be replicated for elsewhere. So yeah, there's practical things like that, and just advocating for the infrastructure. But yeah, these things are sort of all complementary to the big item, which is that we can't accept the status quo. We can't normalize relations with the Taliban and act like this is normal. I think we have to insist on full restoration of all rights with no compromises. And this event that took place this summer, the so-called Doha 3, was a terrible example of the international community's failure here or their deference to the Taliban. So they hosted the Taliban in Doha in talks with the international community, and they excluded Afghan women from being at that event. And what did they get from it? I mean, a few days later is when the Taliban announced the rules about women not being allowed to talk aloud. So the argument that they need to have these conversations and that justifies excluding women from them, it doesn't hold any water. So those are a few of the things, and yeah, we've got more on our website, and I can share more specific action points for different stakeholder groups.
Thanks, Lauren. We have a great question from our Zoom audience. So, sure, thank you so much. So this is from Sam. If I heard correctly, the girls can have an opportunity to leave Afghanistan to continue their education. Is that correct?
So some are not in our programming per se. So I'll use the example of our scholarship program. So I would say, I can't give you the exact figure, but I think about 90% of our applicants are studying in Afghanistan, staying in Afghanistan to study online. And then more are studying in the region. And then a very small number, like 10, go further afield. So we have one at Columbia University, and one in the UK, one in Australia, but for the most part, they're in Afghanistan and then secondarily in the region. So some people do get out.
And how do you get?
Well, that's not easy. Firstly, they have to get accepted into a program somewhere, and then they have to get a visa.
And they're
Um,
applying in secret.
yes, yeah, and then if they get those two things, and then they have to get the money, they have to pay for the tuition. So if, and we do see cases where, you know, someone got accepted on merit into a competitive program, they landed a scholarship, and then they don't get the visa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or they can't pay for the plane ticket or something like that. So these little barriers, if we can knock those down, that's important. I mean, yeah, advocating for Afghans to be able to enter countries to do education is an important part of that puzzle.
Sure. Another question?
Yes, my question was very similar to the one that was just asked. It seems like for a lot of girls, or for a small number of girls, actually, they're able to turn this into going to university abroad and in that way are empowered. But all of the women who are educated through this program and are going to stay in Afghanistan and not necessarily, probably not practice a career in what they studied. Do you still think that education helps them, and how so?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a huge psychological component to it. I mean, we hear so routinely from girls and women who are experiencing depression, anxiety, who have attempted suicide, who know people that have committed suicide. Afghanistan is the only country in the world that has a higher suicide rate among women than among men. And there's tons of evidence of rising suicide rates, specifically because of the education ban. So that's a very real problem. And conversely, we often hear from girls after they've entered a program saying that they get a restored sense of hope. They have a purpose again. And this is so important to know, because we sometimes think, you know, to survive, people just need, you know, food, water, shelter, air. But even going back to the first Taliban regime, I was always amazed at the risks people took to do really human things. Like, you know, music was banned, and people would hoard cassette tapes and listen to them. Or I heard a story about a musician who'd go out in the desert so he could play his instrument without anyone hearing. I mean, people actually also need these things to live. So we see the same in education, that it does bring back hope. Yeah, these students are living with, you know, traumas that can make studying really hard. So in our school, we have psychological support for students, and it's in high demand. So that's important. But you know what they go on to do afterwards. Our online high school, we don't have any grade 12 graduates yet. Our oldest kids are in grade 10. So we do plan to follow them after and see where they end up. A small minority of people are accessing remote work opportunities. And we are advocating for more of those. So employers who can hire people to work remotely for them from Afghanistan, you are really doing an extraordinary service if you can do that, because you know you're helping that woman, but probably her entire extended family as well. We had a graphic designer we're working with in Pakistan. She was like a 21-year-old woman, and she earned, you know, what would be pennies here, and she was supporting her whole family off the salary for the very good work she was doing. Right, it was just a total win-win situation. So there's sort of creative options like this that help. But at this time, most women are not accessing such opportunities. Some are engaging in entrepreneurship and sort of finding, you know, like doing handicrafts at home, weaving carpets, things like that. But certainly the economic opportunities are very limited post-secondary if you stay in the country.
Right. So there's a couple of questions from our Zoom audience about partnerships. So what would you suggest if people are thinking about the partnerships with schools in the US to help them perhaps open up their online platforms to young women in Afghanistan, girls and young women? Or potentially there's another point that was made by one of our Zoom audience members about an organization in Seattle that they're, you know, thinking it could potentially be a partner with your organization or work directly in Afghanistan. How would those schools or people interested in those partnerships, how would they go about it to make that happen?
Yeah, they could connect with us or with the Alliance. And you'll see the member organizations of the Alliance on the homepage. So you could reach out directly to them or go through the Alliance. And that is indeed what a lot of the Alliance member organizations are doing. They're partnering. So we have a lot of, not a lot for us, but like for schools in Afghanistan hooked up with US schools. So the students are able to earn one is called School of Nations off the top of my head. There's one called Living Wisdom High School. Yeah, there's 3 or 4 where the girls in Afghanistan just integrate with the regular students studying online. And often they're exceptional students because they're extremely motivated. And they catch up quickly with language. So that's critically important because credentials is key. You know, these girls are not interested in just like passing the time when they're learning online. They want a piece of paper at the end of this exercise so that they have doors open to them after. So that's really important to, partnerships for Afghan schools to, to partner up with accredited schools.
Yeah, the critical piece, right? So a question from the Zoom audience again is, what are the safety risks that you all face in distributing your baskets, giving access to the young women online? We know the security risks for the young women that are in Afghanistan to access their learning from home, getting internet access. But what about your colleagues, your team members? What are the security risks that they're taking to actually make this all happen?
Yeah, this is a tricky question, so I can't say a lot in detail about this, but I will say that it is our utmost priority, and we're very, very cautious. I can also share that our entire staff team in August 2021, we evacuated every last person. Not in like a day. It took a lot of banging on doors, but we eventually got every person out. So that was every person who was known to work for us. That was 25 individuals and all their families. So it was a couple hundred people. So they're all safely resettled in Canada. And then we hired new people who are not known to work for us, and they work remotely. Their work is not without risk. And anyone engaging in this in any role, staff, teacher, director, student is taking on a risk. But what we often hear from girls and women is there's also a risk in not having an education. So they're making a calculation and deciding what chances they'll take. But we try to make sure that they understand the risks and give them lots of precautions to apply day to day.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for your talk today. I'm Padmaja. I'm a founder of the Learning Platform for Sexual Economic Survivors. I mentioned you offer psychosocial support for the students. I'm curious, how do you make it culturally sensitive to the population you're serving?
Yeah, great question. So we have Afghan counselors, Afghan women counselors, so they really know the context. They have lived experience going through the same restrictions. And we do like one-on-one counseling and also group counseling and also just psychological education, which I think is important as well in giving girls just day-to-day tools to deal with adversity. And then we on our courseware platform, Duty Courses, because this is such a necessary topic for both Afghans in the country and displaced Afghans. We have at least 3 courses. We have one on trauma for the general public. We have one on trauma for clinicians, and we have one on social emotional learning, and another one on mental health. So it is a key topic, and we're going to continue developing resources, and those are all available in the local language as well. So that's one way we address it. And I wanted to mention too, just about partnerships. The other thing that's helpful, is volunteering. So many of the Alliance member organizations rely on volunteers as teachers. We pay our teachers, but we have volunteers in the role of English conversation club leaders. Because when our students switch to the Ontario curriculum, it's a big transition for them. And we get them ready in their middle school years for that transition. And so in addition to their classroom work, they're in these small groups where they get the chance to just talk, to use the language in a more casual way. And we have volunteers, mostly who are in Canada, doing that remotely, and it's pretty flexible. we're able to accommodate different schedules and so on. We have a lot of teachers and former teachers who do that work. So that's another way to be involved. And the feedback we get is it's very fulfilling work for those volunteers.
I can definitely endorse that with this current going. Yeah, that's either even though I'm still finishing my going. So are there any other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
I'd like to ask a question, kind of the flip side of what Julie brought up about, on the one hand, we have people who say cultural relativity as their reluctance to get involved. But Western liberal feminists have lost a lot of credibility with would-be allies who are, well, not mine, but I consider myself a Western feminist, support of the war. And also pitting this as a debate between Western secularism and Islam. And I'm just wondering how you feel are some of these bridges can be repaired with allies who, there are many men in the Taliban and who support women's education. And I'm not saying reaching out to that, but there have also been missteps, I think, some lost opportunities. Do you see hope for repairing any of that?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the way to start is talking, like talking together. And for us, a really important first principle has been listening to Afghans and relying on them and consulting them. So, asking them like, what is the message that you want to take forward? Or here's what we think the message is. Can you validate that? And now we have much easier access to Afghans because there's many new Afghan Canadians in our country we can engage, and similarly here. And there's an organized women's movement. They recently all met in Albania. Hundreds of women gathered, including some managed to come out of Afghanistan and go there to come up with an agenda, not only for the situation of women, but for the country in general. So following what they're doing and taking the lead from them and making sure that there's some unity in messaging. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you that like Westerners who have come at this in a kind of like, I know what you need, I'm going to save you, we've got it all figured out here, and now I'm going to teach you. I mean, yeah, as soon as I arrived in Afghanistan, I understood immediately women here know all about rights. That's, but what they said to me was, we need education to live out our rights. For our rights to actually be realized, we need the literacy rate to go up. So I went back home with my tail between my legs and I re-enrolled in school. I've done a degree in international development and I went back to school in education because the women said, this is what we need. This is how to help us. So yeah, I think that dialogue is really, really important, and it can start here, but also, women in Afghanistan are speaking out. It's not like it was in the 1990s where the country was completely isolated from the world. And there was no internet, there weren't even working phone lines. When I got to the country, I had a satellite phone. That was the only way to communicate, and cost $7 a minute to use. And it's another world now. Afghans are on social media, they're tweeting, they're sharing their observations, but they're actually protesting in the street. And there is still somehow a really lively Afghan media. It's much shrunken, but for the last 20 years, Afghanistan had, I would say, certainly the most independent, freest media in all of Central Asia. I mean, there was hundreds of radio stations, television channels, newspapers, online and print, just absolutely thriving. And unfortunately, many of those have been shuttered, but some continue to operate underground and some came here and are working out of exile. A notable one is Amu TV that started after 2021. There's a great profile recently of them in The Atlantic. And it describes what the risks they're taking to get these stories out. Hashte Sub, the newspaper I mentioned earlier. So all these guys are online and you can, follow their news on social media. You can read their articles. Zan Media is a Afghan women's run media outlet being run from exile. They're doing like absolutely excellent, rigorous research, collecting evidence on femicide and sexual violence and really taboo areas. yeah, so getting information from them and sort of seeing what they're saying they want, what their recommendations are is a good place to start.
Yeah, I think Lauren, that's a critical point is that, we can never forget that the world today is a much more open place. And while there are restrictions in countries like Afghanistan or Iran, or even to some extent here in the US, the information flow is much freer, even if it is contained or constrained. But there is no closed door, so to speak, like there was 20 years ago because of the internet, because people will find a way to get their voice heard. And, I work in the humanitarian development sector. And one thing that we've always seen is whenever you're going into a country, which is exactly what you're saying, you must contextualize and you must always take into account the fact that the people there probably know the best what they need. And listening to them will make our efforts so much stronger. And it's wonderful to see that that's exactly what you all are doing, with the work that you're doing, but also the attitude that you're taking forward. So we're actually out of time. It's been an amazing discussion. Thank you, Lauren, for. I think to a situation that has so many layers of challenges, but also such amazing opportunity and hope. And to see that the girls are getting the light shone on them, which is really what we want to see here at as part of Global Week. I will now hand it over to Barbara, our incoming president, to say some closing remarks.
Thank you, Sajida. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Lauren, we really do appreciate you coming to the campus and sharing these important insights and information, because that's what's critical, that we know what's going on and that we know what we can do about it, most importantly. And I learned a lot today. I'm sure all of you did as well, and online as well. And so we really want to thank you for your time, and we hope that we can stay connected to you. And I'm sure there are people here who already have ideas of how we can do that. So please continue to be connected with us, and we'll definitely be excited to learn more about how many more girls and women are being educated because of your colleagues' efforts. I want to thank everyone for coming today, and I really do encourage you, if you like what you heard today, or if you want to get involved, now's the time. Now's the time. This is just one of many examples of how you can get involved with Global We, and there are many ways to do that. One is just by joining our listserv. If you haven't already, become a member of Global We or a friend. You don't have to be a Harvard graduate to be a friend of Global We. We also have excellent program leadership that could help invite you to participate in some of our programs. And so all you have to do is email our programs team, programs@harvardglobalwe.org. And also, if you have an idea for an event, if there's something that is important to you that you want to champion, we really want to hear from you, because we're an alumni organization, but we're also an organization with a powerful mission to engage people from all over the world on these issues, because the more we can talk about these issues and find ways to develop solutions, the better off our world will be and everyone in it. So I would just encourage you to just stay involved, and really appreciate you for coming today. And we also have a newsletter, if I didn't mention that already. So just feel free to join our listserv. We have excellent events coming up. Just stay updated on it. And we have lots of volunteer opportunities as well. So please continue to be engaged however you'd like to be engaged. And lastly, if you are interested in supporting Global We would really appreciate that. And you can find more information on our website about that. We also have a couple of essay contest books here. So if anyone's interested in taking a look at them, they do have essays from girls from Afghanistan and many other nations. So we have a couple of those after the event. Please take a look at those as well. And so I just want to thank everybody. I want to close this out with some hopeful messaging that when we work together, amazing things can happen no matter what the circumstances or what the adversity is. So please continue to stay involved. And thank you again. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thanks, Anna.